The life of Nelson Mandela, who is the greatest man in history. Is it the mathematician Pythagoras who theorized that the world was round when everyone else believed it was flat? Or how about Aristotle, the philosopher who deduced that the earth revolved around the sun hundreds of years before Copernicus? Maybe it's Leonardo da Vinci, the painter, sculptor and scientist whose works of art are still treasured across the world. He grew up in a big hut with his mother, grandmother, and several siblings. His father, a chief in the area, had taken another wife and moved into a different hut nearby. And although he wasn't present for much of young Nelson's life, the boy did get to see him every now and then. Soon, he joined a political organization called the African National Congress, or ANC, to aim to end South Africa's system of racial segregation known as Apartheid. They arrested him for the illegal possession of weapons and sentenced him to prison. However, Nelson managed to escape punishment when a police officer testified that he had no evidence against him, so the judge set him free. Nelson quickly rose through the ranks of the ANC because of his charisma and intelligence. However, this didn't sit well with the South African government, which deemed the ANC a threat and banned it. He hated them so much that he refused to acknowledge their humanity. 1990. The news spread like wildfire and celebrations erupted across South Africa. People danced and sang in the streets. Many white South Africans felt as though Nelson was going to punish them for their ancestors' crimes. He campaigned for equality and justice for all South Africans regardless of race. And in 1994, South Africa held its first multiracial elections. Nelson won and became South Africa's first black president. Others felt that he was going to turn South Africa into a black nation. But Nelson didn't do any of those things. He has been involved in efforts to promote peace and reconciliation in areas such as Northern Ireland, the Middle East, and Rwanda. He founded the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that promotes his philosophy of peace and reconciliation. Well, as he has said, I don't want to live in a world without hope. I don't want to live in a world without dreams. So perhaps he will continue to travel the world, sharing his message of hope and inspiring people to dream big. He has also served as an ambassador for various companies, including the clothing company EZAD and the financial services company G4S. He has also been a vocal advocate for the rights of women and children. Instead, he reached out to his former jailers, telling them, "If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already." Until next time, his first wife, Evelyn, was a fellow activist who he married in 1944. They divorced in 1958. His second wife, Winnie, was a social worker who became a prominent figure in the anti-apartheid movement. They married in 1958 and had 2 daughters together. However, the couple's relationship was strained by Nelson's imprisonment, and they eventually separated. Nelson and Winnie officially divorced in 1996. Nelson's third wife is Graca Machel, the widow of Samora Machel, the first president of Mozambique. They married in 1998. If there are people among us who believe our country will never again be the same, we must tell them that it is precisely that which we seek to achieve. Perhaps it was his unwavering commitment to justice and equality. Or maybe it was his ability to forgive his enemies and work towards reconciliation. Whatever it was, one thing is for sure. Nelson Mandela was and continues to be an inspiration to people around the world. He showed us that it is possible to overcome even the most difficult challenges, and that one person can make a difference. Fireworks lit up the night sky. Church bells rang out. For many, it felt like a second chance at life. He established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate the atrocities committed during apartheid and to offer amnesty to those who confessed. He also implemented policies to promote equality and justice, such as the 1996 Constitution, which guaranteed human rights for all South Africans. He would curse them and their families. He even stopped eating their food, opting instead to starve himself. For 17 years, Nelson rejected everything the prison offered him: his bed, his food, his clothing. All he wanted was freedom. This forced the group to go underground. But these men had nothing on the subject of today's episode, a man so great that an entire day in July is celebrated in his honor. He explained that he wanted to retire from public life and devote his time to his family and personal projects. He also said that he believed that it was time for a new generation of leaders to take over. As a result, Nelson's mom, who was just a simple village woman, struggled to make ends meet. Before going to jail, Nelson met with some supporters outside and told them that he would rather die than betray his country. Little did he know that this prophecy would soon come true. It wasn't long before he became head boy, the top student. In fact, they intended to keep him locked up forever. This meant that he had two options. Either he could passively accept his fate and spend the rest of his life rotting in prison, or he could resist and try to escape. Although he liked school, though there were certain aspects of colonial life in South Africa that he strongly disagreed with. At first, he tried escaping by working as a waiter in a prison canteen and befriending the warden's daughter. Then he started asking permission to learn how to cook and clean, all the while collecting cleaning supplies and hiding them in the bathroom. But then the plan fell apart, and he was caught. For example, the fact that black Africans had to walk barefoot everywhere, while white people could drive cars. So in protest, Nelson refused to wear shoes until he was 23 years old. And she sent her children off to live with one of her relatives. This left Nelson feeling abandoned and angry at the world. To cope, he started getting into fights with other kids, so his mom decided to send him back to live with her in town, where there was better access to education. A man who went from being a prisoner to South Africa's first black president. This is the amazing story of one of history's greatest men, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village in South Africa called Mvezo. Sadly, when Nelson was only 9 years old, his father passed away, leaving Nelson and his siblings without their main source of income. At school, Nelson was not your typical student. He wasn't particularly bright, but he was charismatic, a natural leader. When Nelson was 16, he left home to attend a local high school. But soon after, he dropped out because he couldn't afford the tuition. It wasn't long before Nelson was also identified as a potential threat by the authorities. After his release, Nelson continued his activism until finally, in 1962, he was arrested again and sentenced to 5 years in prison for acts of sabotage. Upon entering prison, Nelson realized that the government wasn't planning on letting him go after his 5 years were up. As you might have guessed, Nelson chose to resist. This time, instead of trying to befriend the guards, Nelson decided to hate them. Finally, after spending 27 years in prison, Nelson was released on February 11th. However, there was still a lot of tension between black Africans and white South Africans. Following his release, Nelson worked with the government to dismantle South Africa's system of racial segregation. As president, Nelson focused on reconciliation and forgiveness rather than revenge. Many people thought that Nelson would run for re-election once his term was up, but he surprised everyone when he announced that he would not be seeking a second term. Although Nelson is no longer in politics, he remains active in various charitable and humanitarian causes. In addition to his political and social activism, Nelson has also been involved in business. So what's next for Nelson? Regarding his personal life, Nelson has been married 3 times and has 6 children. So what can we learn from Nelson's life? What made him such an incredible man? Thank you for watching this episode.